In this video, we're going to go through two parts. The first part is going to be just looking at, I suppose, the basics around Jiu-Jitsu, strength training, debunking a couple of myths. And then in the second part, we're going to go through our 6-step protocol to making sure that you can combine Jiu-Jitsu and strength training so that you can, of course, build a lot of strength, shred up, lose some body fat, improve your flexibility, and everything else without being fucking confused. So, this is what we're going to do throughout these two parts. We're going to understand BJJ, we're going to understand fat loss, and then we're going to use this 6-step strategy to implement a practical strategy for you. Now, for those of you who may or may not have done Jiu-Jitsu before, you've just started, here are some of the things that we need to remember and know about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It is a martial art that sort of stems from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, which again stems from things like ninjutsu way back in the days and those kinds of things. And then, you know, the Gracie family, which is, I suppose, the most well-known people for this, even though other people did it as well, took the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, made some changes, and then, you know, that's pretty much Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But it involves takedowns, wrestling, and it's also used in self-defense for certain things, even though it's probably not the best thing for self-defense, let's be completely honest. But from a sports jiu-jitsu point of view, we also have to remember that there is no striking or kicking per se. And the variety of competitions you can do is a lot. There are sub-only competitions, which means that you literally go until someone taps. Of course, some high-level competitions, the rounds are 10 minutes, whereas the majority of competitions have 5-minute rounds or sometimes even 3-minute rounds. And with all of this here in mind, we have to remember that the sport itself, like any other sport, is skill-based, number one. So if we take away time from the mats, we're not going to do anything good for the athlete unless it's structured, where we really want to improve, let's say, their cardio because they're not well conditioned enough cardiovascularly to actually be able to utilize their skill sets. Cool. So that would be one example. But as a general rule, you don't want to take time away from the mats. All right. And we got, of course, things like strength and power. We need to have a really well-developed cardiovascular system. Flexibility is a huge component as well. And let's also remember that conditioning, you know, the ability to utilize your skills and your fitness is often completely forgotten. Cool. So that's very, very important to remember. The definition of conditioning is your ability to utilize the fitness that you have actually developed. So with that in mind, if we were to have, I suppose, a quick little breakdown of the physical demands of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we would break it down into things like cardiovascular endurance, which is what we term cardio, I suppose, in layman's terms, maximum strength training, strength endurance, power endurance, flexibility, and of course you need to have the grit psychologically to be able to keep going, to breathe, to stay calm under pressure, and those kinds of things. And the most important components would be cardiovascular endurance, strength endurance, and power endurance. So you probably don't want Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes to only train for maximum strength. You want them to be able to provide a lot of maximum strength in the millisecond and the split second where that's needed. And the same would go for power. But you want to be able to recuperate and recover really fast and do that over and over and over and over again. So there's a lot of, I suppose, pieces to the puzzle in terms of how we actually want to structure a training program for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters. And it very much stems from knowing these components of the sport, but also knowing where the person is at. This here doesn't mean jack shit unless the person doesn't know how to move well, they've not spent a lot of time on the mats, and they're in really, really bad shape. If that's the case, we just got to get these people moving, right? But if you're someone who's been training for a while, maybe you're a blue belt or a purple belt, maybe even a really serious, white belt, you've got an athletic background, you're strong, and you really want to maximize how you feel and perform, then performing things this way and being aware of these components is really going to take your game to the next level. So the next thing we now need to understand is understanding the loss of body fat, which I can't just tell someone to eat less and move more, and we're going to get back to that very soon. But for those of you who don't know, for you to lose body fat, you need to be in what we call a calorie deficit. And a calorie deficit just means that you're eating less than what your energy requirements are, so that your body actually has a reason to break down the body fat that you've stored, throw that into the bloodstream so you burn that off. Cool? That's really what that means. But at the end of the day, if I just told you to eat less and move more, that's like telling a drowning man to drown less and swim more. It doesn't work, right? I can't just simply tell someone who's in the middle of a storm being, dragged into this thing of a monster soup called the ocean to just, hey mate, just swim a bit more, man. You'll be fine. Just drown a bit less and swim a bit more. It doesn't fucking work. And subsequently, I can't just tell you to eat less and move more. I haven't addressed the whirlwind that is, life, and feeling shit after training and being injured and maybe not having, finances to allow you to eat a certain way, or that you've had really bad experiences with other coaches in the past, or maybe that, hey, your schedule is so fucking busy that you can't meal prep. I haven't considered any of that if I just tell you to eat less and move more. So we got to make sure that we remember and understand that eating less and moving more is a fallacy. It actually causes a lot of issues in athletes more than anything else. And, to understand this, we really got to look at terminology. And I just threw this slide in here, number one, because I'm a geek. Number two, because I think it's really fucking important. Like, if someone just tells you to eat less and move more, what does that even mean? Does it mean that you're eating half a banana less? Does it mean that you're cutting your calories in half, which I wouldn't recommend at all? Does it mean that we're counting calories? Does it mean that we're not counting calories? How are we tracking this? Moving more, what the fuck does that mean? Like, does that mean that you're doing another HIIT session? Does it mean that you spend another hour on the mat just drilling? Does it mean that you're going for an extra walk? What does it actually mean? We need to identify what that means, because it has a huge impact on how you will feel. Let me give it to you this way. If you had two people both eating 2,000 calories, then they decided to diet. So person A eats 2,000 calories, is going to diet really hard, so he removes 800 calories from his diet. Now he's only got 1,200 calories left. Now that's not a fucking lot of food at all. So yeah, sure, he might lose weight, but he's going to feel like absolute fucking dog shit. And his body's not going to have enough energy to actually sustain bodily function, meaning that at the end of the day, he's going to lose less body fat, more muscle mass, and he's going to feel like shit mentally. Now, let's say the person B also eats 2,000 calories, but person B has, seen this presentation and everything else that we've done, and person B decides to only remove 400 calories from food and get more steps in every day, equaling to 800 calories, just like person A. So they both end up at 1,200, but at the end of the day, guys, person B is going to feel like $1 million compared to person A, and his body's going to feel and operate so fucking differently. And these are things that we need to remember. So I can't just tell you to eat less and move more. And what about underestimation of food intake and overestimation of activity levels? This stuff happens all the time. So if I eat very little, or I think that I eat very little, but it's actually quite a lot of food, And then I go, oh fuck man, I'm not losing any weight. So therefore I decide to do 2 hours of HIIT training every single day on top of what I'm already doing. You know, we're running into some shit here, guys. We're opening a can of worms, a can of shit worms, for the lack of a better term, where if we forget about this basic terminology and definitions, we're not really going to get that far. And the last thing we're going to touch on in part 1 is something that's really important here, where we're looking at something called energy availability. So energy availability, if we were to look at the definition, is the difference between dietary food intake or calories and exercise energy expenditure. So let's say that you eat a certain amount of food, then you exercise a lot, that burns calories, then you have a set number of calories left, and we express that in relation to the amount of muscle mass that you have in the body. And if you have very little energy left for your body to function normally, what happens is that the brain itself, it actually delegates energy away from parts of your body where that doesn't take as much priority, so to speak, just like the reproductive system, and moves it over to the circulatory system. So guys, if you felt that you can't get a boner because you're on a diet, this is what happens. You probably shouldn't have dieted as hard. Subsequently, when you eat a lot of food, then your boner is there all the time. Girls, it's often the same, just in a different way, right? Where we're looking at things like reproductive health, fertility, people start losing bone mass and have really bad blood profiles in terms of, fat levels and those kinds of things. And there's a lot of stuff that happens here, guys, such as decreases in your immune system and things. And this isn't a new concept, but we've gotten a bit of a new take on it lately, where you got to make sure that if you want to maximize your performance, you got to get to the state or point in time where you know how much food you're eating, how much is required from your sport, and making sure that all the nitty-gritty stuff is completed and accounted for, so that your health is functioning well, that your health is good. If your health is not good, dieting and having a successful body composition change is going to be incredibly hard. Very, very hard. So I'm going to leave you with this in this presentation. This is the first part, but always remember that a healthy athlete is a well-performing athlete. And I think we've covered quite a bit of groundwork here today. Really quick, it's only been 13, 14 minutes here, where you've been able to understand some really important things around Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and combat sports in general. And then, of course, we're talking about food, eating less and moving more, and the fallacy of that. And then we touched briefly on energy availability as well. So thanks for tuning in here, guys. I will see you in the next presentation.